I think when I first was getting comfortable with the idea of showing up and doing vulnerable things, I didn't want people to know that it felt so vulnerable, right? Like being seen as vulnerable was its own scary thing. And now I'm clearly willing and able to share that it feels scary. And I think normalize in some ways that showing up and doing scary things is in fact scary. Whereas once I thought like I had to put on the brave face and fake it till I make it around the things that were scary. Now I feel so much more comfortable owning it because I think it recognizes that you aren't necessarily just supposed to be born with courage and then live that way your entire life. It's about recognizing the fear, like you said, dancing with it and continuing to show up and letting other people know that sometimes it's scary so that they're more willing to do it too.
Welcome to The Courage Effect. I'm Suzanne Weller, and this is a show about growth and unleashing what's possible. You will hear inspiring stories about what courage looks like, how we navigate what's getting in our way, and the opportunities that surface when we choose courage over comfort. Let's get started. Hello, all. Welcome to The Courage Effect. It's wonderful to have you here. The conversation that I'm bringing to you today is with a dear friend of mine, and it is quite a study in courage. I invited Sharon to be on the show, probably a year ago, and it took us a while to make this happen. And I have to tell you, I am so grateful that it did. This conversation is one that sits with me deeply, and I'm sure that it will do the same for you. We explore the multifaceted nature of courage, emphasizing its inner and outer dimensions. We discuss personal experiences of courage, the evolution of what courage looks like over time, and the importance of somatic practices to understand our body's responses to fear and discomfort. We also touch on the significance of boundaries and the courage required to say no, highlighting that courage is a skill that can be developed rather than an innate trait. Some of the key takeaways that you're going to hear from this conversation is that courage is a value that becomes a way of being. It ultimately is a skill that can be learned and practiced, and it often involves discomfort meeting purpose. We talk about the importance of showing up and being seen and how terrifying this can be. Sharon talks about some of her personal experiences here. And ultimately, we all have a role in creating larger social change. I collaborate with Sharon on quite a regular basis, and I have to say, I rarely leave any conversation with her not feeling like my brain has been expanded, my heart has been touched, and I am so grateful for her friendship and for her being a guest on the show today. So here's some background on Sharon before we start the conversation. Sharon Podobnik is a leadership coach, facilitator, and founder of the Center for Conscious Leadership. She helps leaders and teams build the courage and capacity to lead with purpose and integrity, transforming the way we work from the inside out. Sharon brings deep insight into the psychological and sociological forces that shape our lives, bridging the personal and systemic to help clients drive meaningful, lasting change. Sharon is also the author of a fantastic book called It's Not All Your Fault: Self-Help and the Individualization of Oppression, which is a bold exploration of how overemphasizing personal responsibility can stall collective progress. She also delivers weekly leadership love to thousands of inboxes, including mine, every Monday. So if you want a little inspiration and a lot of truth to start off your week, sign up at the centerforconsciousleadership.com. All these links will be in the show notes. So here's the conversation. There's a lot of gems that I know that you'll be taking with you. Sharon, as somebody who is an inspiration and a dear friend and a collaborator, I'm so honored to have you here. Welcome to The Courage Effect.
I'm so glad to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
One of the things that you said as we were preparing for this conversation was about living a courageous life and the idea of courage being both an inner and an outer game. And that to me was very intriguing and is so aligned with, I think, a lot of the conversations and work that we've done, a lot of what you've written about in your book. When I talk about that, when I bring up the idea of inner versus outer game for courage, what surfaces for you?
Oof, so much. And I love what you're saying already about living a courageous life, because courage is such a value. And when we hold that as a value, it becomes a way of being rather than a one-time action, right? And so that's the first thing that it services. When I think about the inner game of courage and what it means to live a courageous life, I really think about how subjective that is for everyone and how it really changes over a lifetime, right? The things that felt courageous to me when I was 35 or 25 or 15 or 5 years old was very, very different. And so much of what we experience as courage, because when I think about the definition, right, the definition of courage to me is the ability to act with fear at the edge of our capacity where discomfort meets purpose, right? So I'm going to be a little bit uncomfortable anytime I'm doing something courageous. And what's courageous to me now is very, very different than what was courageous to me yesterday or a long time ago, right? I think in the preparation for this call, we talked a lot about publishing my book, right? And how publishing the book felt very courageous. And now I'm like, well, shoot, I already did that. That's not scary to me anymore. I could put out another book tomorrow. And while it would be a little bit nerve wracking, it would not be ever so nerve wracking as the first one, because my inner game has shifted. What felt uncomfortable to me 5 years ago when I was starting to publish the book doesn't feel as uncomfortable now, because my entire system and my entire nervous system and my inner game has shifted around that to now include that thing as a thing that is comfortable, as a thing that I am capable of. And now there's a whole new horizon of things that feels uncomfortable and feels on the edge of my capacity now. So it shifts.
Well, and I love that you're talking about it in that way, because I'm very much the believer that life is in chapters, right? So things happen overall. We leave things behind. We take on new things. And what you're talking to me right now about courage is it's the same thing, right? There's a certain amount of sloughing off fear. I mean, the whole idea of fearlessness is bullshit.
Yep.
So the idea of how do we dance with fear? How do we have it in our lives, and how do we expand our capacity for it? Very relatable, just as far as what you're talking about. I'd love to go back a little bit to younger Sharon. So what were some of the earlier times in your life where you felt courageous?
I want to talk about that, but I also want to talk about the times in my life when I didn't feel courageous. It just felt normal, right? So right now, and I think we're sharing video, so I'm going to share what my phone background is. And it is me when I am 9 years old. And
Amazing.
I am just so feisty. I have so much personality in that picture. And I have her as my background because she wasn't afraid to be as feisty as she was. She wasn't afraid to have this big, huge personality and to let it come out. And that shifted over time, right? So I did feel comfortable being my fullest, most Sharon self at some point. And then I was taught that maybe I should not be so me, and that I should be a little meeker, and I should be a little quieter, and I should maybe take up a little bit less space, and I should maybe not have such strong opinions. And it was really like socialized out of me. And then it became super scary to be her again. And so I want to say for the last 10 years, I have actively, consciously, and intentionally been trying to go back to that version of me. And that feels so courageous right now. And it just came so effortlessly to her then, right? So I think we got the both and side of things where that didn't take courage. Now it does. What are some things, gosh, that used to take courage and now they don't? I'm still working on showing up and being seen, right? So like what we're talking about, like in the book. And comically, when I was in that stage of reducing who I was, being seen at all was terrifying. If you knew me, middle school, high school, college, I didn't really talk very much. I never showed up in class. Like I did not raise my hand. I was not the kind of person who volunteered for things. Being on a podcast would have felt terrifying, absolutely mortifying. And like, not to say that it's not scary now, because showing up and being seen as a woman, as somebody who's been conditioned and socialized to be quiet and step out of the spotlight, is still incredibly scary, but just not, it doesn't hurt the same. It doesn't feel as scary because I've also just gotten accustomed to fear being present all the time. Like I kind of joke with my husband sometimes. I am constantly doing things that terrify me. I'm always afraid. I'm just doing it anyway. And people half the time cannot tell that it is happening despite the fear because it just can sound and look so effortless. And it is not. It is still incredibly scary.
Are you doing that intentionally?
Partially was, I think when I first was getting comfortable with the idea of showing up and doing vulnerable things, I didn't want people to know that it felt so vulnerable, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
being seen as vulnerable was its own scary thing. And now I'm clearly willing and able to share that it feels scary. And I think normalize in some ways that showing up and doing scary things is in fact scary. Whereas once I felt like I had to put on the brave face and fake it till I make it around the things that were scary. Now I feel so much more comfortable owning it because I think it it recognizes that you aren't necessarily just supposed to be born with courage and then live that way your entire life. It's about recognizing the fear, like you said, dancing with it and continuing to show up and letting other people know that sometimes it's scary so that they're more willing to do it too.
Yes, that whole idea of modeling it,
Yeah.
and that's the whole reason why I do the show, because of courageous contagion, right? And
That's right.
you also, I mean, and we are of the shared belief that courage is a skill, right?
Mhm.
It's not a trait.
That's right.
Talk a little bit about that to me.
Yes. So I think I talk a little bit about this in the book too, that when we are looking for someone to show up and save the day, we often think that we're looking for somebody who was just born with charisma and courage and this ability to take a stand about something that they believe in. When in reality, if we're sitting around waiting for that, we're taking ourselves out of the driver's seat. We're not being as powerful as we could be. And we're sort of giving in to the idea that it takes a certain kind of person to make change and to show up, when in reality, like you said, it's a skill. It's something that is teachable. It is something that we can learn. And so when I think about being able to embody a practice of courage, to be courage, to be courageous, I think a lot about what skills we need to master to be able to show up the ways that we want to, right? So when I think about those skills, I think about engaging in the somatic practices that help us to know when we're in our window of capacity versus outside the window of capacity. Being able to recognize that is a skill in and of itself, to know if I'm feeling safe and engaged and connected, or if I'm starting to feel like I'm going into survival mode, I'm starting to feel anxious and frightened and like I want to get myself out of here, the fight or flight side of
Mhm.
things. That is a whole skill in and of itself. And then to be able to increase our ability to tolerate the discomfort is a skill. To be able to engage in coping mechanisms and practices that reorient us to our safety in the midst of discomfort is a skill. To be able to tolerate the friction when we're standing up and being seen and taking a stand is a skill, right? And being able to say, actually, this is too much for me. I'm going to step back and develop my capacity a little bit more is a whole nother skill. So I think the ability to engage in practices like somatic titration and increasing our self-regulation, to be able to recognize that it is a process and a learning process over time is a skill and is actually very teachable, very trainable. It's one of the things that we do in our nervous system workshops, actually. So we talked about this a little bit beforehand. One of our biggest workshops that we are asked to bring into organizations right now is around nervous system regulation and to be able to engage in courageous conversations, not with a new protocol or a new framework around how to give difficult feedback, but really, how do I increase my ability to self-regulate so that I can stay safe and engaged and connected in the midst of difficult conversations in real time when it takes courage to say what I'm about to say, and when it takes courage to receive however the person is feeling without trying to control the outcome necessarily, but to stay engaged and regulated in the midst of courageous conversations and really truly courageous decisions too.
Great. Talk about a little bit about somatic titration, because I'm pretty
Oof.
sure that a lot of people don't know what that is.
Yes, I could talk about this forever. So Somatic titration, I'll give you an example, right? So I was working with a client a couple of months ago who kept getting the feedback as a woman in a tech organization that she needed to state stronger opinions. She needed to show up more. She needed to be able to give hard feedback. And she knew conceptually what it meant to give hard feedback. She knew the frameworks around it. She knew everything she needed to know to be able to do that. And yet, every time she went into a feedback conversation, her palms are sweating, her heart is racing, the shoulders are tightening, she's getting nauseous the morning of the conversations. And it's not because she doesn't know what to do, it's because her nervous system did not yet have the ability to stay regulated in the midst of these really hard conversations, right? And when we think about traumatizing experiences, trauma is often seen as too much for too long without having the ability for our nervous systems to come back to a state of okay, to come back to homeostasis, right? And so for her, difficult conversations felt traumatizing. They were beyond what her nervous system was capable of coping with. And so when we're talking about somatic titration, what this means is being able to operate at the speed of trust with our nervous system. Our nervous systems are more intelligent than we could ever give it credit for and know what feels safe. And so what we can do as coaches, as leaders, is to be able to say, okay, I know what feels safe right now, and I know what's going to stretch my safety just a little bit, and I'm going to operate in that stretch zone until it feels comfortable again. And then I'm going to find the next place that feels stretchy and that feels a little bit uncomfortable, but I'm able to regulate and I'm able to cope from it. And I'm going to stay in that zone until it feels comfortable, until I can stay regulated there. And so I'm actually increasing the window of capacity and increasing the window of what I can tolerate over time to titrate in these feelings and experiences of discomfort so that it grows over time. And like we were talking about earlier, what used to feel uncomfortable now is an everyday experience. I'm totally fine with it because I've learned to be able to cope in these situations. I've learned to be able to stay safe and connected and regulated and courageous in that moment. And it just doesn't hurt the way that it used to, which means over time, over months, over decades, being able to really do things that felt incredibly uncomfortable before and increasing our nervous system's ability to hold all of it and to cope from it so that it no longer feels traumatic. We're able to stay in safety and homeostasis.
Thank you for that.
Of course.
That was just a nice little summary of some polyvagal theory.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
You're making me think about the idea of, mindset. Mindset is so important for all of us as far as like where we are, where are we coming from. But it isn't just about mindset. It's about somatic practices, in the body, what is happening in our mind and our body, because those are the same thing, even though, some people don't necessarily like to think about it. How do you, I'm curious, obviously, because I'm a coach and I do similar work in that regard. When you ask people like, how is this feeling in your body? And sometimes people just don't even want to go there. Because this is a core part of your work and a lot of what you bring, I'm curious, how do you bring people to that side of wanting to experiment with more of the somatic work and polyvagal and titration, et cetera, et cetera?
Such a great question. And if I'm speaking again, very vulnerably and honestly, when I started therapy 12 years ago and my therapist would ask me those questions, I would just look at it like, I do not know. I don't feel anything. I am not aware of feeling anything in my body. I'm stressed after a hard day, I guess. Like I didn't have either the language or the awareness of my own body to be able to talk about what was happening in my body. And so for my therapist, where we started was in very like, let's look at the picture and name the feeling. What feeling do you see in this picture? And so I started by actually naming it outside of me and being able to see it outside of me. And the place where I often start with a lot of my coaching clients right now is because we're in, different frameworks here, is that I'll start by observing things in them. I see that was a big sigh. That was a great sigh. What are we letting go of right now? I am seeing your shoulders and I am seeing that there's a little bit of tension in your body. Are you feeling that too? So as a coach, we have this different relationship where we're able to make some observations about what we're seeing. Or on the flip side, like the client that I was talking about earlier, I noticed that she had to like shake it out every time she talked about a certain person or a certain feedback conversation. Great. great, we're just going to start drawing some awareness to these practices that you're already engaging in, because we all are already coping. They may be adaptive practices, they may be not so helpful practices, but we have the ability to say, okay, here's what I see that you're doing, here's how I see you coping, and to work with somebody else to start to develop those practices. If we are not currently working with somebody and want to start developing some of that awareness, it can be noticing when we are, for me, I'll go back to my experience, when we're dissociating, right? So that was a time in my life when I drank a whole bunch, and I started to pay attention to when I would want to go home and just open a bottle of wine after work, what happened on those days, so that I could start to draw connections between what's happening outside my body and how I'm reacting to it. And then also just the like super basic like body scans. And I would listen to so much meditation, YouTube, body scan stuff until I could actually start to notice the differences without somebody prompting. So it's both the inner game and the kind of game that we can work with others to start to develop, because other people are going to see that we're stuck or that we're frustrated or that we're stressed out, and other people can really help us to start developing that awareness. And if we trust that our bodies are wise and communicating with us all the time, which they are, just starting to listen and get curious can be transformative.
I love that you talk about that as far as paying attention, because it is, and especially like with the drinking example, right? And for a lot of people, it's like the eating example. Maybe it's like, exercise or some physical, other ways that, I mean, we numb out in different ways. Right. So, but it's fascinating when you do pay attention to it, because in the past, I've been like, oh, I'm really craving something sweet right now. And I'm like, that's because there's something that I want to celebrate. And that was always the way that I would celebrate, like being a little girl and getting ice cream or something that was just showing love. And it was a way of showing myself love. But it's like, this probably isn't a good idea. Like it's nice to have a treat, but when your mind and your body really start to associate those things, it can be dangerous.
Super dangerous. And there was a book that I read at the time called This Naked Mind that really helped me to stop and think about why we do what we do, right? And especially with things like alcohol and food, alcohol is kind of everywhere. It's supposed to be the thing that we go to celebrate. It's the thing that we go to when we're sad sometimes, food too. And so we start to develop all of these connections. And for me, it was incredibly courageous to show up and not drink somewhere, because then I knew that I was going to be asked questions. And if I was going to be asked questions, I had to have an answer for that. And sometimes I was able to share and I was willing to share, and sometimes I wasn't. And so being able to show up with sparkling water and people not knowing what's in it felt deceptive, but so courageous at the same time. And then being able to eventually talk about it, that was scary. And that was scary. And to be able to be reflective enough and to develop the awareness in ourselves of like why we want something sweet right now, why I do want to crack open a bottle of wine right now is, the start to courage and somatic practices and everything rolled into one.
Yeah, beautifully said. We're going to cut to a break. I want to come back and I want to talk to you about, the courage to say no, the courage to draw boundaries, and to know when it's too much for your body or your system, or when it's just too much in general, because that to me is also safety, not just about taking the risks and building the capacity, but sometimes it really is just about saying no. And I know you have a lot of thoughts on that. So
I do.
All right, everybody, you're listening to The Courage Effect. We'll be right back. Each episode of The Courage Effect offers you a chance to meet inspiring guests, hear their stories, and spread what we call courageous contagion. The podcast's mission is to amplify courage in your lives, workplaces, and communities. So how can you be a conduit for courage and support this podcast? The best no-cost way is simple. Subscribe or follow The Courage Effect and leave a comment or a review. You taking the time to do this helps us get the word out, to reach more people and amplify what's important to you. It also ensures that you won't miss any future episodes. I'm so honored that you're a part of this community, and I'm glad you're here. Now back to the show. Welcome back to the Courage Effect. Sharon, a question for you. As you're talking about safety, because that is one of the things that as we talk about courage being that dance with fear, safety is obviously something that is so core to us as human beings, and knowing when to test that boundary and knowing when to pull the ripcord or say a hard no. Talk to us about how that shows up in courage for you.
Such a good question. So I don't know if we were socialized in similar ways, but saying no as a child, as a woman, was just the worst possible thing, right? Saying no to somebody in an authority role. That's like, even right now, I'm feeling my body feeling that like stress and agitation just from the idea of saying no to somebody in authority, right? And it is an incredibly uncomfortable thing because we have been made to feel incredibly uncomfortable by the folks we have tried to say no to in our lives. It just makes sense. And when I think about, which we were talking about with boundaries, to me, my favorite definition of boundaries is the distance from which I can love both you and me, right? And sometimes that requires saying no, and sometimes saying no is just too hard and feels just too courageous in this moment. And so for me, I know that I am on the verge of doing something courageous when I spend some time feeling the no in my body first, right? So there are still things that I am afraid to say no to, really worried about saying no to. I'm worried about what it's going to mean for my career. I'm worried about what it's going to mean for the connection to the person that I'm saying no to. And even if I will say yes when I mean no right now, sitting in my fact that it says no, that my body is telling me no, I don't want to do this, I don't want to do this, and recognizing those signs is already the first step for me in taking that courageous step, right? So even if we're not in a place to say no yet, letting that no in our bodies get so loud that it's unignorable starts with feeling safe in the no, right? So we're talking about how to create more of that safety. Let the no be there. Don't push it away. Give some fuel to the no. Let it become so big that eventually it does come out of our mouths and we say the no, and we're able to protect ourselves, protect our energy, be able to stay regulated in the midst of saying no. And so when I think about the boundaries, the no that allows me to love both me and you at the same time, the ability to stay in connection with somebody because I'm not trying to control you. I'm not trying to control the outcome. I'm trying to control how I feel about this. That is the place where I have the most power, the most agency, the most ability to stay regulated and to stay in my own body and to stay okay with that. Man, I think if we taught little girls how to say no early and often when they felt uncomfortable, and let us develop that sense of safety in our body saying no, what a different world we would have. And if we also supported folks early in their careers in saying no to ethical dilemmas at work or saying no to more work, we probably wouldn't be on the verge of the burnout epidemic that we're on right now, right? And I think you know as well as I do not intend to put the burnout epidemic on us as individuals. But also there comes a point where people will continue to take advantage of our yeses as much as they can systemically in our institutions, in our organizations. If we do not have the boundaries to protect ourselves and our well-being, some of these organizations will take and take and take and take from us until there's nothing left. And so culturally, we have a phenomenon where we're not told to respect our no's. We are told to overcome them and to push through and to continue hustling. And when we do that, we will deplete ourselves. We will put our bodies and our systems into a state of unsafety. And the systems will often take as much as we're willing to give them. So I think it starts with, if we want to create cultures, organizations, entire nations where we are not burning out ourselves, each other, and the planet, we need to start respecting no in a whole lot more places. And it starts with the inner game of letting the no's exist in our body and then really respecting them to the degrees that we can.
Beautiful. You're also making me think of your book. The name of Sharon's book, It's Not All Your Fault, which is such an intriguing title. I remember when you started that. And then the subtitle, Self-Help and the Individualization of Oppression. Your book is so powerful to me in so many ways, and I know it will be also to a lot of our listeners, because the idea of that inner game, right? It's like it talks about the self-help industry and the idea of what you can do as an individual. How can you start to, like maybe build that chamber of courage, all of these things that we're talking about. But you talk about how it eclipses at a point
Mm.
of really and truly putting all of the blame, as it would be, or the change on the individuals
Mm-hmm.
back, and not looking to those larger opportunities for it. Sometimes it's not just about you, it really is about how are we creating larger social change. Talk a little bit about your history from your earlier
Yep.
organizations and how you came to that change, because it was very different from where you started.
Yes. So, such a good question. And the title, It's Not All Your Fault, um, really came as a result of me recognizing that fact, which seems so silly and so simple. But for so long, everything felt like it was my fault, right? The fact that I couldn't control the anatomical systems of my body and control my weight down to the ounce felt like it was my fault and that I should have absolute control over that. How people treated me, either in relationships, in the workplace, how my family treated me, it felt like everything was my fault and my responsibility. And so I will never forget being in the fetal position on the floor, crying, reading a book called You Can Be Happy No Matter What. And I was looking at my bank account and looking at my student loans and looking at the fact that I was a teacher at the time, making $36,000 in a huge metropolitan city, not being able to pay rent, not being able to pay my student loans, and like my budget for food was like $10 a week, right? Like I was doing everything in my capacity and I was like, I'm supposed to be happy right now. Okay, sure. If we want to take a look at like the Zen attachments, all of that kind of stuff, sure, there's a way to be happy. And I was reading somewhere around 50 self help books a year, trying to take responsibility for every facet of my life. And the thing with self help, right, is that we are forever given more and more and more and more aspects of life to take responsibility for. And the genius of self help is that there will never be an end to it because there will always be more problems that we can take responsibility for, right? And so the self help that was on the shelf 10 years ago is incredibly different than the self help that was on the shelf 20 years ago or 200 years ago. But the reality is that self help has always existed because we're always looking outside of ourselves for answers. And systems often try to put the responsibility for our own well being back onto us. Now, notably, self help isn't as popular in places like Europe, where there is more of an expectation of social responsibility and social safety nets, right? So, in this country, in the United States, there's a huge expectation that we will be responsible for everything in our lives. And so we're constantly looking for ways to make things okay, from how our bosses treat us, how we're supposed to be managing up, to the diet industry, which is massive. And even though there's no, quick fix, that doesn't stop them from selling quick fix diet books every year and trying to take responsibility for that. So I think I'm getting a little bit off topic, but I think the overarching point is we need to decide both individually and societally what's our responsibility and what we're going to take responsibility for and what we're going to let others maintain the power to have. And the biggest point around this is that we're taking a ton of individual responsibility for a ton of aspects of our lives that, were we to work together collectively, would just make things a lot easier for a lot more people, right? And so there would be a lot less boundaries we'd have to set and a lot fewer times that we'd have to say no if we had expectations in workplaces across the board around what was acceptable and how much work was acceptable. And so I think when we're thinking about the individualization and how much responsibility that we take onto ourselves, I want to be cautious, right? Because there is more responsibility we can take. And we don't want to get to the point where it is overburdening the individual and taking the onus and burden away from the people who are doing the asking and the organizations who are doing the asking who maybe also shouldn't be.
Yeah, well, beautifully said. I mean, and the whole idea of the both and, right? I mean, how do we live in that space where we can understand that yes, there is obviously individual accountability and responsibility, but we also can contribute to the larger system. That also doesn't mean that we have to do it all on our own.
That's right. That's right. That's right. And to figure out what's mine in the work, right? So one of the other big pieces of the book is that we need you, right? Every single person to contribute what's theirs to contribute in the ways that they're able to contribute, and to say like, okay, this is the thing that is affecting me and I'm going to speak up about it. And so we need to be able to do the courageous thing to say, this is a problem that I am facing, and to both have the courage to say that thing and to put forth solutions for how to be more inclusive, for how to make things more equitable across the board. And so the both and of me being able to speak up individually and to tolerate that discomfort individually, but then to also have systems that are able to hold that discomfort and processes that are able to receive that discomfort, so that we're not shutting down people who are just advocating for themselves in this world and deserve the equity and equality that everybody else deserves too.
Yeah. Well, I'm thinking so much about how much disruption is happening in our country right now. And it's the idea of, it doesn't mean that our systems aren't like really deserving of change. There needs to be a lot of change, but a lot of the change that has been put in place is happening with a sledgehammer. Yeah. And that has been, and is it necessarily in the larger, greater good, the broader public interest? And I think those are the things that we are, for me, we're just getting so much more disassociated from each other. And this is one of the reasons why I left most of my social media accounts, as you know.
Yep.
But the idea that we live so, I mean, independence is a wonderful thing, but there comes a point where the autonomy is almost crippling, where we don't look outside of ourselves and how we can support each other, how we can learn from each other. And that to me is, I think, another reason why, from a courage point of view, we have to understand what do we want to be responsible for? What do we feel we have the ability to change, and not just throw up our hands and say, well, this is what it is, or somebody's bullying you into doing it. And those are, I think that's right now, I feel like that's a daily practice.
100%. 100%. And it makes me think about a couple of things here, right? Do our systems need to change? 100%. Is it happening with a sledgehammer? 100%. Are the folks making those decisions also being conscious of reducing harm? I'm not seeing that. And as leaders and as folks who want change and want to see social justice elevated, we also have a responsibility to reduce harm everywhere that we can, and to make sure that the people that these systems are serving aren't falling through the cracks. So that's a whole nother conversation that I think we could get into in a much deeper way. But it also makes me think about like the social contract, right? And I participated in a conversation this morning, actually, around to what do we owe each other, and what is the social contract, and what do we want the future of the social contract to be. Generally speaking, taxes have a terrible rap. And most of us, like, that's just, it's the punchline to a joke. And when taxes are supporting things that we support, it's not the butt of jokes anymore. It's part of the social contract, right? And so I think as we are in a state of massive flux, and as individuals learning to say no, learning boundaries, learning what we want, learning to come back to our own values and sense of well-being, and recognizing how long we've been individualized and asked to do things on our own. And I mean, everything is a response to the thing before it, right? We've been so hyper individualized for so long that people are craving community and collective and coming back to that. And so I see the tendrils of this future that wants to exist, and I see that this future is pulling us closer. We want connection, we want collective action. And as we're building this next thing that's going to replace the systems that are in some cases falling apart, in some cases being torn apart, we have the opportunity to create something better than has ever existed. And we need to be able to do that from a place of courage, taking a stand and being able to do so while being regulated and while feeling safe enough to take a stand and to fight for what we believe should come next.
Yeah, I love it. And it's now I'm coming full circle. So I'm going to bring us around.
Yeah.
Because we're right now, it's the whole idea of like, well, it is what it is, which is, and I have said that more times in my life than I've probably wanted to. And there's certain times where I go back and I'm like, oh God, like I need to call bullshit on myself. Like what the hell was that? So that is a phrase that just gets my hackles up, but also born that way. So going back to what we were talking about originally, the idea of courage truly being a skill as opposed to a trait.
I'm going to speak to what you just said about it is what it is, though, first, because one thing that is fundamentally true is that we can't change something we don't fundamentally understand. And we cannot change something that we haven't accepted, right? And so if I hold on to an optimistic idea of what a system, a person, a community, and anything is, I won't actually be able to change it the way that I want to because I'm holding on to an idealized version of that thing, not that thing, right? And so if I want to create change, I need to accept that it is what it is and work with the entirety of what it is, all of the best parts and all of the worst parts in order to create that change. And I need to not be looking outside of myself for somebody else to take a stand because I know that I'm falling prey to that right now. I'm like, well, who's going to do something about it? And what good is it if 333 million people are looking around going, well, who's going to do something about it? When in reality, the thing that's going to do something about it is 300 million people saying this doesn't work for us. Yeah. And working together to build the next thing, right? So I think as we are looking for the next thing that's going to come, figuring out what we can contribute to that and figuring out what the most courageous way forward is for us in building that thing, because it's a learnable skill, right? It is a thing that we can practice. It is a thing that we can grow. And most often, the people who do end up taking a stand are either the ones who are directly impacted and therefore don't have the luxury of looking around to see who's going to do something about it. If we're directly impacted, we need to do something about it. And the people who fundamentally have accepted what it is and have the courage and have been working for a long time on building up the courage, on building up the community organizing skills, because again, that's another skill, to know how to create the change and also know how to tolerate the discomfort of the inevitable pushback when we do receive it. And so for anybody who is listening, who is thinking about stepping up and making that change, one of the things that my organization does is support leaders who, for instance, want to run for office and know that there is something they are incredibly passionate about, want to create change. And my team steps in to be like, great, and now we're going to help you with the leadership side of things, because it's one thing to have passion and to believe in something different. It's another thing to have the leadership skills and abilities to go and make that happen in a way that is effective and respectful of the people that you would bring into the coalition and the team helping you to create that change too. So if you are that person who wants to create the change, reach out to us. We'll see if we can hook you up with some coaching, some pro bono coaching at that, because we believe that it is a collective transformation that does need to happen and that everybody has a role in creating that change.
Well, and I love that you're actually really calling out the importance of the supporting cast, because so much of it is like, well, I'm not necessarily going to be the one that's going to run for office. It's like, okay, but there's so many things that you can do to support the ones that are. And the idea of how do you make change when maybe you are not the one that's on the podium?
Oh, completely.
And I also, when we were talking about it is what it is, and the idea of what was coming up for me was accepting that it's the reality, but that doesn't mean that you just are resigned to it.
That's right. I will not be a person who runs for office. My nervous system just can't handle that, right? I know myself well enough that I know I don't know if I'll ever be that comfortable with being seen. And I have a role in helping other people to be seen, because I can champion you and I can support what you're up to and I can do all the background supporting cast work. And to your point, acceptance is not resignation. Acceptance is not, it is what it is and it will be this way forever. Acceptance is it is this way right now. And we have agency, power, and the ability to create something different and to shape what comes next. 100%.
Yeah, it's the what now.
What now?
Totally. And so I do want to go back. So, and this is the born that way analogy too, because in our collaborations in the past, you exude confidence, you exude capability. And I know in the years over our friendship, that is a challenge for you, that when you talk to me about being seen, it is a hell of a lot of work to do that. And the idea that you're born this way and that you have this natural talent, and I get upset with this too, because people are like, oh, you're just so good at that. It's like, and I have to work my ass off to do it.
Yeah.
Talk to me a little bit about that, where courage comes in for you as far as being seen and bring us home.
Oof. So let me just add context to this day. I had nothing before this conversation, and I have one thing after this conversation, and it's another conversation with you, right? And so I have to clear my entire schedule for the day, because I know that even today, as we're recording this podcast, my body is not the same as it is on any typical day. I know that I have a heightened state in my body, that I am more on edge than usual. It still requires a ton of courage for me to show up here today. And in the past, I think we joked about this earlier, like I would have spent so much time preparing my physical presence for something, because I thought what my hair looked like would so impact how I was received. And so showing up in a messy bun today is like its own little act of courage for me, which to somebody else may just be like absolutely nothing. But for me, it's a huge deal, because I had so much identity and worth wrapped up in physical appearances. And for folks who are listening, you would have no idea, right? Like you would have no idea about how much would or could have gone into the angst around how we literally physically show up for things. And so I think, again, in this born this way thing, as little ones, we have so much capacity for courage, and it is either thwarted by the people around us or supported, and we're encouraging folks to be really courageous. And regardless of what was true for you then, every single person has the ability to decide whether or not they're going to show up in a more courageous way today and tomorrow and the day after that. And so, I mean, I kind of laugh saying that I'm not going to be the person to run for office. 40 years from now, I could be singing a very different song if every day from now until then, I'm engaging and showing up a little bit more and being seen a little bit more and increasing my ability to be comfortable with that, so that when I'm, 70 years old, people look at me and go, was she born that way? Did she always know she wanted to have a public facing role? We just don't know, right? And so whether this is you and you're thinking about being seen, or a little person in your life, the more that we can encourage folks to do the scary thing and to increase our ability to tolerate the discomfort and to take on courage day by day, conversation by conversation, decision by decision. I hope that we will start to normalize that most of us aren't born this way. If we are, it's often socialized out of us, and it is what it is. We have the ability to do something different now.
So well said. Well, I am so happy that you're here. I'm so honored that you mustered up the courage and everything else to be here. I mean, and the idea of discomfort meeting purpose, when you talk about that, that really and truly is a great way to describe courage, and the idea that it's embodied so differently in so many different acts at so many different levels. And we can't just take for granted that what isn't courageous for us isn't for other people.
100%. Completely.
Sharon, thank you. Any final thoughts you want to share before you ride off into the sunset?
I don't think so. Thank you for inviting me. Great to be part of the conversation, and hope to continue the conversation.
Thank you. Always enlightening. I love the work that you do at the Center for Conscious Leadership, and you as a human. Those of you out there, if you haven't read Sharon's book, highly recommend it. And if you have additional questions, please feel free to reach out to her or to me at thecourageeffect.com. Sharon, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Take care, everybody. Stay courageous. The Courage Effect is brought to you by Weller Collaboration. If you're looking for a leadership coach, maybe a speaker or a consultant to help you or your team be more courageous and adaptable, we would love to have a conversation. More information is available via the links in our show notes. please spread the word about the Courage Effect. You taking a few minutes to rate or review your favorite episodes or share them with people in your universe makes a big difference. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. For more information about the show, me, our amazing guests, or you'd like to apply to be a guest on the show, please contact us via our website at thecourageeffect.com. It takes a village to bring this show to you. I want to thank Alex Sandyforth for her production and administrative superpowers, Dave Nelson for composing our theme music, and I am your host, Suzanne Weller.